What's up guys, Rogue9 here, and today the Łupków Pass map has finally been released to the regular game servers in Battlefield 1. You may have already seen some footage of this map on YouTube or even played it on the CTE server, but for those of you who aren't that familiar with the map yet, here's a quick overview. As you can see, the Austro-Hungarian team starts on the left-hand side of the map at point A, and the Russian team comes from the opposite direction at point G. And yes, that makes it 7 capture points, which is a great thing because, as we saw on Suez, having a long narrow map with few capture points can end up in quite a number of unbalanced games. But it seems as if DICE have learned from past mistakes and created a map that not only is geared towards operations, but should also really work well in conquest. Now, starting out at flag A on the Austro-Hungarian side, we can see that it is an ambushed supply convoy. And even though the capture zone looks relatively open at first glance, the destroyed armoured cars, artillery pieces and supply wagons do offer some cover. Since this point is at the edge of the map, it can only be approached from 3 different directions. The road we can see straight ahead now, the forest to the left of it offering loads of cover, and then the high ground to the right. And even though there is enough cover around the flag to protect yourself from long-distance infantry attack, anyone hanging around trying to capture the point is vulnerable to attack from the air. Having said that though, anyone attacking the point from the high ground also has a great overview, and if we go back down to the left-hand side of the point looking at the forest, you can see that the terrain is quite rough, thereby providing a lot of cover for any troops moving across to A from point B. And I would say all of these factors combine to make point A rather easy to take and very difficult to defend. Point B is a Russian artillery position with almost no defensive structures or fortifications at all. It does have the advantage though of being right next to a sheer cliff face, which means that you should normally have a fairly good idea of where your opponents are coming from. Being a relatively forested area also gives you some cover against air attack, but the high ground on the other side of the road can provide a great platform for long-ranged enemies such as scouts, suppressive machine gunners, or medics with sniper variant rifles. And of course, if point A is in enemy hands, you should also expect infantry sneaking up on you through the rough forested area we mentioned earlier. And since we've been coming around the left-hand flank of the map here, let's continue and go straight to point E, which you can already see in the distance here. Even though the stretch between Butter and Edward is relatively open and overlooked by high ground towards the center of the map, you can use the flanking paths and the stream for cover. Also, as you move along here, the edge of the map on the left continues to be a solid border, meaning that you only have to worry about attacks from the high ground and straight ahead of you. Edward, as you can see here, has 2 destructible buildings that you can use for cover, as well as an artillery piece and an AA gun, and of course a sentry kit. Once you clear this point of enemies and get into it, it is relatively easy to take. The solid cliff face behind you means that all enemies can only come from a sort of 160-degree angle in front of you. And if we continue counterclockwise around the edge of the map along the train tracks here, you can see that the theme kind of continues. You will have high ground in the center of the map and various sunken routes across to the next point, which can provide cover. On flag F, similar to E, you have several buildings that can provide destructible cover, and you also have an artillery piece and an AA gun. The difference between Edward and Freddie is that Freddie can be attacked from a 360-degree angle, from behind, from Point George, as well as the high ground in front, as well as the right and flanking routes to the left. To compensate for this, Freddie does have significantly more cover than most of the other capture points. I've already mentioned the buildings, and as you can see, there is also a trench and a significantly large boulder. Small freestanding roofs covering firewood can also make for excellent little hiding spots. As you may have guessed already, the Behemoth, or Behemoth if you prefer, on the Łupków Pass map is an armoured train. The train can travel between Edward and Freddie points, and despite not being able to take any of the other points directly, its indirect fire capability can be significantly beneficial to the losing team, at least for the time being. How useful will it be once Inconspicuous has been introduced? Well, we can only guess. And my guess would be quite a lot less useful. But that's pure speculation. But now let's finally move on to what I consider to be the key to this map. I've mentioned the high ground so frequently now, you're probably sick of hearing about it, but don't be, because I think this area of the map probably has the greatest strategic importance. Especially capture point Duff here with the shot down bomber. because from here you can access all of the 4 capture points around it. Butter, Charlie, Edward and Freddie can all be directly reached from here. Holding Duff and allowing your teammates to be able to spawn here means that your team has the capability of reacting very quickly to reach any of the surrounding points. The bomber and the crater that it left during its crash on Point Duff provide a reasonable amount of cover against infantry attacks, but do be aware that being up on the high ground like this does leave you exposed to air attacks as well as mortar and train attacks. And despite being so central, the sheer cliff face facing towards Freddie does at least mean that the infantry on the enemy's side can only attack you from 3 sides instead of from all around. The second point on the central high ground is Point Charlie. The trenches on this point do provide reasonable cover, but do be aware of infantry attacks coming from this rocky outcrop and medieval guard tower. And that is of course the stone tower in the background, not this open wooden guard tower in the front. These can be found on several points in the map, but exposing yourself on an open tower like that usually leads to a fairly quick and painless death. Strategically, Point Charlie is once again very important. It gives you direct access to Duff, both as an attacking platform and as a way to bring in reinforcements if Duff is contested, and from Charlie you can also head directly down the hill to Apples and Butter and across the other way to Freddie. As with Point George, up here you are vulnerable against air attack, so do keep an eye out for those planes. The end of the trench facing towards Point George does have a heavy machine gun position, and as you can see, Charlie also has a sentry kit on offer. The forested area facing down towards Apples is once again quite rough, undulating, and with trees and bushes for cover, infantry from both sides do stand a good chance of traversing this area without being too much harassed by long-distance fire. To get to Freddie from Charlie, you can take various routes across the hill past the guard tower. And before we move on to the final capture point, let me just give you another look at Freddie itself before all of the destruction. Like most of the buildings on this map, 2 of the huts are single-story, but the larger one you can see in the background is in fact 2-story. And with that, let's finally move on to what in Conquest sadly is probably one of the least strategically important capture points, Point George, and this has to be probably one of my favorite capture points in the game so far. Here we have beautifully laid out Russian defensive positions in and around a medieval castle ruin. From the center of the map, it can only be reached from Point Freddie or by flanking around Point Freddie to the left and right, but of course the Russian team does have their home spawn in behind the castle. This makes Point George quite challenging to take and hold by the Austro-Hungarian team, but usually since most of the combat focuses around the center of the map, you do have a chance of getting here and sneaking in and taking the point unopposed. That is, at least until the Russians start spawning behind you, and even though the maze of small rooms within the castle does allow assault troops to lie in ambush, there is only so long that you will be able to hold out once people start spawning there in earnest. Point George also offers great protection against aerial attack. You do have an artillery piece that can reach all the way down to the enemy train, and you will be able to pick up the flame trooper kit here. Although I have to say I don't really know who would want to. I have tried the flame trooper kit on this map, and because it's so open, you do become a priority target for all these snipers and machine gunners lying around, and what's even worse than that, it's almost impossible for you to get any kills because of the limited range of your offensive weapon. Now, if you want to go elite on Łupków Pass, I say stay with either of the sentries from the center of the map, or just go cavalry. And that's just about it. As I mentioned, I think the key to victory on this map does lie in holding the central high ground, but do take care that you don't let the enemy team hold all of the points around you. I think this is kind of like Foul Fortress. Holding the fort can convey a significant strategic advantage, but if everyone focuses just on the fort, the enemy will just hold all the surrounding points and you're going to lose. Making sure that you keep control of the central high ground around Point Charlie and Duff, but also that you don't allow the enemy team to capture all of the rest, and that you take advantage of these central spawn points to launch attacks on the surrounding areas, is a delicate balancing act, but I hope that with the information that I've provided you in this video, you will now be able to positively influence the battle in favor of your team. And with that, as always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next episode.